Inside, I felt like I was borrowing more than fabric. I was borrowing confidence. Borrowing permission. Are you sure? Ifeanyi had asked earlier, holding the hanger out to me. You look like you're the one hosting the event. Adrian Cross stood barefoot against the cold glass of his penthouse window. The city spread beneath him like a living map of light and motion. If you're new to this channel, just subscribe now, and say it in the comments section. From this height, traffic became veins of gold, people reduced to purpose and direction. He owned much of what glittered below. Office towers, residential blocks, entire streets that quietly paid him rent every morning. But none of it felt like it belonged to him tonight. At 38, Adrian was what magazines called a miracle. He had built a logistics empire from a rented warehouse and a borrowed truck, turning efficiency into fortune. His name moved markets without his presence. His signature carried weight without explanation. People listened when he spoke, nodded when he paused, and agreed even before he finished sentences. Power had become so normal to him that he rarely noticed it anymore. What he noticed was the silence. Behind him, the penthouse was immaculate. Not lived in, maintained. The furniture had been chosen by a designer who understood status better than comfort. The kitchen gleamed without a single fingerprint. The bedroom looked untouched, the bed smooth, the air still. It was the kind of space meant to impress guests, not hold a life. Adrian lifted his glass of water, took a sip, then set it down untouched on the marble counter. He had stopped drinking alcohol months ago, after realizing it made conversations louder but never deeper. Tonight, even water tasted flat. His phone buzzed. He didn't need to check the screen to know who it was. The timing was too precise, the persistence too familiar. Still, he glanced. Vanessa. So, are we still on for tomorrow? Or are you flying somewhere again? Adrian exhaled slowly before replying. Adrian, I'm in town. Dinner's fine. 3 dots appeared instantly. Vanessa, good. I found a place. Dress nice. He stared at the message longer than necessary. Dress nice. As if he ever didn't. As if his clothes were the reason she stayed. Vanessa was beautiful in a way that photographs loved. She laughed loudly, touched his arm often, and spoke about their future in sentences that always included the word upgrade. Better vacations, better homes, better friends, better circles. She never asked about his childhood, his fears, or what kept him awake at night. She asked about timelines. When he first met her, he had mistaken her attention for interest. It took months to understand the difference. The memory he couldn't shake, though, came from 2 nights earlier. They had been in this same penthouse, city lights flickering behind them. Vanessa had kicked off her heels and poured herself a drink without asking. She had wandered through the space like she was already arranging it in her mind. Can I ask you something? She said casually, scrolling through her phone. Of course, Adrian replied. She didn't look up. If something happened to your money, like, say, the business collapsed or whatever, would you still be worth loving? She laughed softly as she said it, like it was a joke that didn't require an answer. Adrian remembered the exact second his chest tightened. He remembered the silence that followed, how she finally looked up, eyebrows raised, waiting for reassurance. Well, she prompted. I don't know, he said carefully. What do you think? Vanessa smiled, leaned in, and kissed his cheek. Don't be dramatic. That's never going to happen. That was when he knew. Not because she was cruel. Not because she was dishonest. But because she couldn't even imagine him without money. To her, Adrian without wealth wasn't a man. It was an impossibility. The phone buzzed again. Vanessa, by the way, my friend loved the bracelet you got me. She's asking where you shop. Adrian turned the phone face down. This wasn't new. He could trace the pattern back years. Different women, same rhythm. Admiration that turned into expectation. affection that slowly shifted into entitlement, compliments about his intelligence that quietly became praise for his lifestyle, love that felt conditional even when it wasn't spoken aloud. He walked back to the window and looked down again. When he had been poor, truly poor, people had looked at him differently. They had seen effort before outcome, hunger before success. He remembered working 18-hour days, sleeping in his office, eating cheap meals with coworkers who believed in the idea more than the paycheck. Back then, no one pretended to love him, but when they cared, it felt real. Now everyone loved him, and none of it felt solid. Earlier that day, during a board meeting, one of his executives had joked, "Man, if I had your money, I'd never worry about relationships again." Everyone had laughed. Adrian hadn't, because money had become the very thing standing between him and the truth. He turned away from the glass and walked into his bedroom. On the far wall hung a framed photograph he rarely looked at. Himself at 25, standing beside his first delivery truck, clothes wrinkled, smile wide, eyes burning with certainty. He looked happier then, not because life was easier, but because it was honest. Adrian sat on the edge of the bed and finally let the thought surface fully, without pushing it away. What if I removed the money? Not destroyed it, not abandoned it, just stepped away from it long enough to see who remained. The idea frightened him more than any business risk ever had. Because this wasn't about loss, it was about exposure. Without wealth, he wouldn't be impressive. Without status, he wouldn't be protected. People wouldn't assume value before knowing him. They would judge him as he was. Adrian stood and walked into his closet. Row after row of tailored suits stared back at him, each one a uniform of success. He touched the sleeve of one, then another, feeling nothing. "If money is the problem," he said aloud to the empty room, "then money disappears." The words settled, calm and deliberate. Not forever, just long enough to find the truth. He imagined a life without recognition. No drivers waiting downstairs. No reservations held under his name. No eyes calculating his worth the moment he entered a room. Just space. Just silence. Just him. For the first time that night, Adrian felt something close to relief. He picked up his phone again, opened a new note, and began to write. Plan. Adrian Cross did not disappear overnight. He dismantled himself carefully, piece by piece, the same way he had once built his empire. Methodically, deliberately, without witnesses. The first thing to go was the penthouse. Not sold, not abandoned, just sealed off like a paused chapter of his life. He instructed his assistant to tell everyone he was traveling abroad for an extended period. No meetings, no calls. No emergencies that couldn't wait. Then he did something that felt almost absurd. He packed a single suitcase. It held plain clothes bought from regular stores, not the kind with private fitting rooms or whispered greetings. Jeans, t-shirts, a jacket that didn't fit perfectly, shoes no one would recognize. He left behind his watches, his tailored suits, the subtle armor of wealth that had clung to him for years. Standing in the empty penthouse one last time, Adrian looked around without nostalgia. The space had never known him anyway. He turned off the lights, closed the door, and walked away without looking back. The apartment he rented across town was small, clean, and unremarkable. 3rd floor, no elevator, thin walls, a view of another building's brick exterior. When the landlord handed him the keys, she barely glanced at him. "Rent's due on the 1st, she said flatly. "Understood," Adrian replied. She nodded once and walked away. No smile, no curiosity, no special treatment. The quiet that followed was different from the silence of the penthouse. This one felt real, lived in, honest. He placed his suitcase on the floor and sat on the edge of the narrow bed. The mattress creaked under his weight. He almost laughed. For years, his life had been padded with comfort so extreme that he had forgotten what resistance felt like. Now the world pushed back gently, reminding him he was human. The next morning, he woke without an alarm. Sunlight filtered through cheap curtains, casting uneven shadows on the wall. Somewhere nearby, a neighbor argued on the phone. Car alarm chirped and died. Life, uncurated and unsympathetic, carried on. Adrian stood in front of the small bathroom mirror and studied his reflection. Without the polish, the posture, the certainty that came from being recognized, he looked ordinary. Still handsome, still composed, but stripped of context. "Who are you now?" he asked quietly. The man in the mirror didn't answer. By midday, he had crafted his new identity. Simple enough to be believable. He was a freelance logistics consultant, ironic enough to amuse him privately, but struggling. Work came and went. Money was tight. No promises. No prestige. When people asked what he did, he kept his answers short. When they pressed, he shrugged. He learned quickly that most people lost interest once they realized there was nothing to gain. And that, strangely, felt like freedom. The cafe was 2 blocks from his apartment. Small, warm, slightly worn at the edges. The kind of place where regulars were known by habit rather than name. Adrian stopped there on his 3rd day in the neighborhood, drawn in by the smell of coffee and the low murmur of conversation. He stood in line, scanning the menu, when a voice said, "Next, please." He looked up. Lena. She was standing behind the counter, sleeves rolled up, hair pulled back loosely, a pen tucked behind her ear. There was nothing performative about her smile. It appeared when needed, disappeared when not. "What can I get you?" she asked. "Coffee," Adrian said. "Black. Small or large?" "Small." She nodded, rang it up, and took his payment without comment. Their fingers brushed briefly when she handed him his change. She didn't linger, didn't look twice. He waited at the counter, watching her move with quiet efficiency. She spoke kindly to an elderly man about his usual order, gently corrected a teenager counting coins, and wiped the counter between customers without complaint. When she handed him his coffee, she said, "Careful, it's hot." "Thanks," Adrian replied. That should have been the end of it. But the next morning he returned. And the one after that. Not because he expected anything, he didn't, but because the cafe made him feel grounded. It was one of the few places where no one knew who he was supposed to be. After a week, Lena finally said, "You're here a lot." He smiled faintly. "I like the coffee." She raised an eyebrow. "You always say that." "It's still true." She considered him for a moment, then nodded. "Fair enough." They began to talk in fragments. Small comments exchanged between orders. Observations about the weather. The broken door that whistled when the wind picked up. Nothing personal. Nothing invasive. One afternoon, when the cafe was nearly empty, Lena poured herself a coffee and leaned against the counter. "You work nearby?" she asked. Adrian hesitated for half a second, long enough to choose the lie. "Sort of," he said. "I freelance. Whatever comes." She nodded, not probing further. "That can be rough." "It can," he agreed. She took a sip of her coffee. "Still, it's better than pretending to be something you're not." The words landed harder than she could have known. "Yeah," Adrian said quietly. "It is." Over the next few weeks, their conversations deepened naturally, without intention. She never asked about his past in a way that demanded explanation. She spoke about her long shifts, her exhaustion, her habit of reading late at night when she couldn't sleep. He listened, truly listened. One evening, as he stood to leave, Lena said, "You look tired." "So do you." She smiled. "Occupational hazard." He hesitated, then said, "Would you want to get dinner sometime?" "Nothing fancy." She studied him, not evaluating, not calculating, just seeing. "Sure," she said, "as long as you don't mind simple." Adrian felt something loosen in his chest. Their first dinner was street food eaten on a bench, paper wrappers crinkling between them. They talked about nothing important and everything that mattered. She laughed softly. He found himself smiling without effort. At one point, he admitted, "I'm not in a great place financially." She didn't react the way he was used to. Instead, she shrugged. "Most people aren't." "No, I mean," he stopped himself. "I just want to be honest." "I appreciate that," she said. "Life's heavy enough alone." The words stayed with him long after they parted. Walking back to his apartment that night, Adrian realized something that unsettled him. For the first time in years, no one had tried to impress him. No one had asked what he could provide. No one had measured him against what he owned. He was invisible, and for the first time he didn't mind. Adrian began to notice the change not in grand moments, but in the quiet spaces between them. It was in the way he looked forward to evenings now, not because of what they might do, but because of who he would be with. It was in how his apartment, once just a temporary shelter, started to feel warmer, less hollow, simply because Lena had sat on the edge of his couch and laughed there. It was in how his thoughts, once dominated by logistics, projections, and control, now wandered toward simpler questions, like whether she preferred tea or coffee when she was tired. Their relationship did not announce itself. It grew. They saw each other after her shifts, sometimes late, sometimes brief. Some nights they walked aimlessly through the neighborhood, sharing observations about strangers, inventing backstories for people they passed. Other nights they sat on the steps outside his building, eating cheap takeout, shoulders brushing, comfortable in silence. There were no expectations, no schedules, no pressure. Adrian realized how rare that was. One evening, as they walked past a closed bookstore, Lena stopped suddenly and pointed at the dusty display window. "I used to come here when I was younger," she said. "I couldn't afford most of the books, so I just read the first chapters standing there." Adrian smiled. "Did anyone ever stop you?" "Once," she said, laughing softly. "The owner asked if I needed help. I told him I was just browsing. He said, 'Then take your time.'" She looked at the darkened window, nostalgia flickering across her face. Some people are kind without needing a reason. Adrian felt the words settle somewhere deep inside him. Kindness without calculation. That was what he was beginning to feel from her, and it unsettled him more than cruelty ever had, because it left him unguarded. As weeks passed, the small tests came, not ones he designed but ones life offered naturally. One afternoon, distracted by a phone call from his assistant that he ignored too late, Adrian reached the counter at the cafe and realized his wallet wasn't in his pocket. He froze, embarrassment rising. He started. "I think I forgot my wallet." Lena glanced at him, then at the coffee already poured. "It's fine. I can come back," he said quickly. She shook her head and slid the cup toward him. "You get the next one." He searched her face for annoyance, for disappointment, for judgment. There was none. "Thank you," he said quietly. "Don't make it a habit," she replied with a faint smile. Another time, during a rainy evening, Adrian mentioned casually that his rent was due and he was short. He hadn't intended it as a confession, just an observation, spoken aloud without thinking. Lena didn't offer money. She didn't pity him. Instead, the next day, she showed up at his apartment with a container of food. "I cooked too much," she said. "Thought you might want some." He accepted it, something tightening in his chest. She never tried to fix his life. She simply shared hers. That was when Adrian began to understand how deeply the lie had entangled him. Because the more real their connection became, the heavier the truth felt. Every moment of happiness carried a quiet echo. She doesn't know who you are. Every smile felt earned and undeserved at the same time. He watched her carefully, not to judge her, but to reassure himself that what he felt was real. She complained about sore feet after long shifts. She worried about her mother's health. She talked about dreams she hadn't fully let herself believe in yet. None of it revolved around money. None of it involved him rescuing her or elevating her life. One night, as they sat on his couch, sharing a blanket while rain tapped against the window, Lena asked, "Do you ever think about where you'll be in 5 years?" Adrian hesitated. "Sometimes," he said. She nodded. "I try not to plan too far ahead. Makes disappointment easier." He studied her profile. "You don't seem disappointed." She smiled faintly. "That's because I don't expect life to impress me. I just want it to be honest." The word struck him like a quiet accusation. Honest. Later that night, after she had gone home, Adrian lay awake staring at the ceiling. The room felt smaller now, not because of the walls, but because of the weight of what he was hiding. He had built entire companies on transparency, yet here he was, lying by omission to the one person who mattered most. He told himself he would tell her soon, after a little more time, after he was sure, but certainty kept moving further away, because revealing the truth would change everything. It would test not just her feelings, but his own intentions. Was he ready to accept her reaction, whatever it might be, without retreating behind his wealth again? Days turned into weeks. Their bond deepened. They argued once over something small. He had canceled plans last minute, and she called him out on it. "I don't mind if you're busy," she said, arms crossed. "I mind if you disappear." "I didn't mean to," he replied. "I know," she said. "Just don't make a habit of leaving people guessing." The irony nearly broke him. Yet even in conflict, there was no manipulation, no threats, no emotional leverage, just honesty spoken calmly. That was when Adrian realized the most dangerous thing about the lie. It wasn't protecting him anymore. It was threatening the very thing he was trying to find. One evening, walking home after dinner, Lena slipped her hand into his without ceremony. The gesture was simple, natural, unguarded. Adrian felt a rush of warmth followed immediately by guilt. He wanted to deserve this. As they reached her building, she stopped and looked at him. "You're quiet tonight," she said. "Just thinking." She smiled. "Careful. That can be exhausting." He laughed softly. "You have no idea." She leaned in and kissed him. Slow, gentle, unhurried. Not because of who he could be. Not because of what he had. Just because he was there. As she walked inside, Adrian stood on the sidewalk long after the door closed. He finally admitted the truth to himself, without excuses or conditions. If he didn't tell her who he really was, this wasn't love. It was theft. And if he did tell her, he risked losing the only person who had ever chosen him without knowing his worth. For the first time since he started this experiment, Adrian was afraid. Not of being used, but of being known. Adrian chose the evening carefully. Not because it was dramatic, but because it was quiet. A weekday. No crowds. No noise to soften the impact of what he was about to do. He had learned in business that timing could change outcomes. But this was not a negotiation. This was surrender. He arrived early at the cafe, sitting at the same small table near the window where Lena sometimes took her breaks. The chair across from him remained empty, and the absence felt heavier than it should have. He folded his hands together, then unfolded them. His pulse felt louder than the espresso machine behind the counter. When Lena finally stepped out from the back, apron untied, jacket over her arm, she smiled when she saw him. "You look serious," she said lightly. "That's usually my job." He stood. "Can we go for a walk?" She studied his face for a second longer than usual, then nodded. Okay. They walked in silence for 2 blocks. Adrian felt every step echo inside him. He had rehearsed this moment 100 times in his head, but now that it was here, the words refused to line up neatly. I need to show you something, he said at last. Lena slowed. That sounds intense. It might be, he admitted, but it's important. She didn't pull away. All right, lead the way. They took a cab. Lena raised an eyebrow at the destination, noticing the shift in scenery as the streets grew cleaner, taller, more polished. This is a fancy area, she said. I know. She looked at him, curiosity sharpening. Adrian? I'll explain, he said quickly. I promise. The building was quiet, understated, guarded by security that recognized Adrian instantly but said nothing. He had instructed them earlier to remain silent. Tonight wasn't about authority. It was about truth. Inside the elevator, Lena's posture stiffened slightly. Okay, she said slowly. Now I'm officially confused. The doors opened to the penthouse floor. Adrian stepped out first, then turned to face her. Before we go in, I need you to know something. She crossed her arms, not defensively, but bracing herself. You're scaring me a little. I've been lying to you, he said. The words hung between them, bare and unforgiving. Lena's expression shifted, not to anger, not yet, but to alertness. About what? About who I am. He took a breath and opened the door. The city spilled into the room in waves of light. The height, the space, the unmistakable language of wealth written into every surface. Lena froze just inside the doorway, her eyes moving slowly, absorbing details she had never seen before. This is... She stopped. Whose place is this? Mine. She turned to him sharply. You said you rented a tiny apartment. I did, he said. This is my home. My real one. Silence. Lena walked forward, not touching anything, as if the room might accuse her of trespassing. She stopped near the window, staring out at the city she thought she knew. You told me you were struggling, she said quietly. I was, Adrian replied. Just not financially. She laughed once, a short sound without humor. So what is this? A joke? No, a test. He flinched. I didn't think of it that way at first. She turned to face him. Then what did you think it was? He stepped closer but stopped a safe distance away. I thought if I removed the money, I could find out who cared about me, who stayed, who didn't see me as a wall at first. Her jaw tightened. And I was part of this experiment. I didn't plan it, he said quickly. I didn't meet you thinking I'd lie to you. It just happened. And then it got harder to undo. She shook her head slowly. You let me think you were barely getting by. I know. You let me worry about you. I know. You let me show up with food because I thought you needed it. The words cut deeper than any accusation. I never meant to take advantage of you, Adrian said, voice low. I swear, every moment with you was real to me. That's not the point, she said. The moments may have been real. The foundation wasn't. She walked past him, back toward the door, then stopped. Why now? She asked. Why tell me this now? He swallowed. Because I fell in love with you, and I couldn't stand the idea that the person you loved didn't actually exist. Lena closed her eyes briefly, as if steadying herself. She turned back, her expression no longer soft, but controlled. Let me ask you something. Anything. If I had known this from the start, she said, each word deliberate, would you have still noticed me? The question struck him harder than he expected. He opened his mouth to answer, and realized he couldn't. Because the truth was complicated. Because money had shaped his vision for so long that he didn't know whether he would have seen her across that cafe if he had walked in wearing a tailored suit and a watch worth more than the building. His silence was answer enough. Lena nodded slowly, pain flickering behind her composure. That's what I thought. She reached for her jacket. I need to leave. Lena, please, Adrian said. I know I don't deserve forgiveness right now, but I need you to understand. Everything I felt was real. I didn't fake caring. I didn't fake listening. I didn't fake wanting a life with you. I believe that, she said softly. He looked up, hope stirring. But believing you cared doesn't erase the fact that you decided I needed to be tested, she continued. That you assumed love had to prove itself to you. That wasn't about you, he said desperately. That was about my fear. She met his eyes. Your fear still made me collateral. The words landed with finality. She walked to the door, paused, then looked back one last time. I don't hate you, she said, but I can't stay tonight. I need space to figure out what was real for me. Will you come back? He asked quietly. She hesitated. I don't know. Then she left. The door closed with a soft click that echoed louder than any slam. Adrian stood alone in the penthouse, the city still glittering, still obedient, still his, yet the space felt colder than it ever had. For the first time since he started pretending to be poor, he understood the full cost of his wealth. It hadn't just attracted the wrong people. It had taught him to doubt the right ones. The days after Lena left stretched longer than Adrian expected. Time did not slow in any measurable way, but his perception of it changed. Mornings arrived without purpose. Nights came too quickly. The penthouse, once a symbol of achievement, now felt like a museum dedicated to a version of himself he no longer trusted. He stopped going to meetings, not because he couldn't, but because none of them mattered. His assistants sent updates. His executives made decisions. The empire continued without him, efficient and indifferent. It was the first time Adrian truly understood that success did not need him, only systems. What it lacked was meaning. He replayed every conversation with Lena, not to justify himself, but to understand where he had failed. He realized the lie had not been about money alone. It had been about control. By pretending to be poor, he had tried to control the outcome of love, to shape it into something safe. And in doing so, he had treated her sincerity as something that needed validation. On the fourth day, he walked back to his modest apartment across town, the one he had rented for the experiment. He stood in the doorway for a long time before entering. The air inside was stale, untouched. The couch still bore the faint impression of where Lena had sat, legs tucked beneath her, laughing at something he had said. He sat down and let the quiet settle. That night, for the first time since she left, Adrian slept without the penthouse lights on, without the city watching him. The next morning he made a decision. He would not chase her with explanations or apologies dressed up as gestures. He would not overwhelm her with proof of remorse or promises of change. If Lena chose to return, it would be because she wanted to, not because he persuaded her. But he also refused to hide. He went back to the cafe, not as a customer seeking comfort, but as a man willing to face the consequences of his truth. The bell above the door rang as he entered. The smell of coffee hit him like memory. For a moment he thought she wouldn't be there, that fate or timing would spare him. Then he saw her. Lena stood behind the counter, hair tied back, expression composed. She looked up and froze briefly when their eyes met. The pause lasted only a second. Then she nodded. "Hi," she said. "Hi," Adrian replied. He didn't approach the counter. He didn't speak again. He simply waited, hands clasped loosely in front of him, not as a man with expectations, but as one asking permission. After a few moments, she handed her coworker the register and stepped out from behind the counter. "Walk with me," she said. They stepped outside, standing on the sidewalk where they had shared countless small moments before. The street looked the same. The world had not shifted to accommodate their discomfort. "I didn't come to explain," Adrian said first. or to ask for forgiveness. She glanced at him. Then why are you here? Because I wanted to be honest without asking for anything in return, he replied. I needed you to know something. She crossed her arms, listening. I was afraid of being loved for the wrong reasons, he continued. So I tried to eliminate the risk. But I see now that love doesn't survive tests. It survives trust. And I didn't give you that. She was quiet for a long moment. You know, she said finally, when you told me you were struggling, I didn't feel generous. I felt equal, like we were standing on the same ground. I know, he said, and I took that from you. She nodded. That's what hurt the most. They walked in silence for a while. Then Lena stopped near the cafe entrance. I didn't come back for the money, she said, and I didn't leave because of it either. I understand, Adrian replied. She studied him carefully. Do you? He met her gaze. I think I'm starting to. She took a breath. When I realized you were wealthy, I didn't suddenly feel small. I felt unseen. Like the version of me you loved only existed because you chose not to show up as yourself. That's fair, he said quietly. She searched his face, not for reassurance, but for consistency. Tell me something, she said. If you had never lost trust in people, if you hadn't been hurt before, would you have done this? He didn't answer immediately. No, he said finally. I wouldn't have. She nodded once. That matters. They didn't reconcile that day. They didn't kiss. They didn't make promises. What they did instead was start over, not from the beginning but from the truth. Over the next weeks, Adrian showed up consistently. Sometimes they talked. Sometimes they didn't. He stopped pretending to be someone else, but he also stopped leading with wealth. When Lena asked about his work, he answered honestly, without embellishment. When she asked about his life, he didn't curate it. He learned how difficult honesty could be when it removed his advantage. Slowly, Lena allowed him back into her world. Not as a savior, not as a provider, but as a partner. She challenged him. She called him out when old habits surfaced. She didn't excuse the lie, but she acknowledged the growth. One evening, months later, they sat together at the same bench where they had eaten street food on their first date. Adrian handed her a small paper bag. What's this? She asked. Dinner, he said. From the same place as before. She smiled faintly. You remember. I remember everything, he replied. She took a bite, then looked at him. You know, you never really answered my question. He frowned slightly. Which one? If you had known who I was from the start, she said, would you have noticed me? Adrian didn't hesitate this time. Yes, he said, because now I know what to look for. She studied him for a long moment, then nodded. That was the moment she chose him. Not the billionaire, not the experimenter, but the man who had learned, at great cost, that love was not something to be filtered or controlled. Adrian didn't lose his fortune. He didn't gain a gold digger. He gained clarity. And for the first time in his life, love didn't feel like a risk worth managing. It felt like a truth worth trusting.